when I was a teenager, I was a bit of a fucking delinquent and a fuck up, and I got put on the streets when I was 16. My mother kicked me out the house literally on my 16th birthday, which has led to us having a very fractious relationship that we've only recently repaired. I had a tough time at school because I was a A student, but with D tier, like D student sensibilities. So the school didn't treat me particularly well. The college didn't treat me particularly well. And I had been told repeatedly by my teachers that I would never pass the exams required to get into university. That somehow, because of my inherent bad breeding, they knew my father was in prison. I wasn't meant to be in college, you see. They had very old, outdated attitudes. They were from, a different time. And because my father was in prison, that basically I wasn't meant to be. I would fail on the big day because there would be some sort of cosmic intervention that would turn me into a failure. That's just what happens to the poors, right? And that's how I was treated at college. So I was in this like fucked up weird spot where I was living with my godmother for a time, and then eventually I managed to negotiate my way back onto an agreement to basically live in a shed like Jackie. It's why it's sort of funny seeing him having spent so much time in a shed, but basically I got to live in a shed at the end of the garden. So, and occasionally be allowed in to use amenities. And, I was putting myself, I was going to college and trying to, decide what I was going to do in my life. And anyway, my best friend, Chris Madison, my best friend at the time, who was a lovely guy, and had done so much, because I used to get beaten a lot at home by my stepdad. We used to have fights, as I got older. The fights kind of leveled up, but I used to get a good shoeing. He was a working man, blue collar, super strong, leathery skin compared to a teenage boy. So Chris would organise camping trips and stuff like that on the weekend, so just to get me out the house, So Chris he was like not a straight A student, but behaviourally was adored by his school, his college, and was very physically fit, could have been a professional footballer, but as a teenager, he read the book Bravo 20, and he wanted to go into the military, and so he qualified for the Royal Marines. Now, during my last year of college, Chris and I used to train together, and it was in that time I went from being a skinny guy with long hair to being a big, strong, capable of doing fucking 10 pull-ups, which I couldn't do now, probably, or certainly, teenager, and I was trying to build up my physical, because the Marines is very demanding. I was trying to build up my physical strength and fitness to be able to meet the standards. You have to do it's 40, it doesn't sound a lot, but it's 40 press-ups in 60 seconds, it's 40 sit-ups in 60 seconds, it's like 5 pull-ups in 60 seconds, and you have to be able to run it's something like a fucking mile and a half in 10 minutes, or whatever it is. So anyway, we used to train together a lot because I became convinced that with the family being the way it was, and the school being the way it was, there wasn't going to be an option for me. I had a choice. I could either enter an elite military unit, or I could end up in a factory. That was it. That was how it was going to play out for me. I didn't want that. So I didn't feel that was right. But out of those two, there was no choice, right? I wanted to join the Marines. So anyway, we trained up together, and I was getting there. I was physically very robust at this time, and Chris was insane. I mean, you have to understand, at 17, Chris had 18-inch biceps. He was a fucking monster for his age. I mean, one of the strongest dudes I have ever met in my life, and he was dead by 23. So, I mean, he was just a specimen. And he ran that marathon, I think, in Egypt. That one where you go through the fucking Sahara or whatever it is. He did that, I think, for charity, for fun. I mean, he was just wild. So anyway, Chris went into the Marines, and he got in and I didn't. I failed on lung capacity, which is important. I mean, I couldn't swim. So I had to work really hard on the swimming catch-up, but that's fine. I mean, it sounds crazy, but Swim. They can teach you to swim. What they can't teach you is fucking, they can't give you the physical capacity to hold your breath underwater for fucking 3 minutes, So anyway, I was like, my lung capacity wasn't good enough. I was an asthmatic child. And so I didn't get in. And they offered me the Marines recruitment building in Middlesbrough was right next to the Army recruitment building. And Chris, I was thinking, well, I'm still going to have to go in the military. Like, let's see what the options are. I went next door and they said, like, oh, you can get in the Green Howards if you want with that physical, where you're at physically. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. Ideally, because my uncle was in the Green Howards, and the Green Howards, they were stationed in Ireland and dodging car bombs. So it was a tough time, and I didn't fancy that. Traveling the world on a boat, that's fucking sick. Getting blown up in Belfast, or getting your legs broke by a honey trap, less appealing. So anyway, I went and sat my exams. I got the results required to get into a university, and because I was estranged from my family, and Chris was in the Marines, I basically applied to like universities like super far away, and I got into a university through what they call clearing in the UK. And I went to a university, and anyway, while I was at that university in my last year, Chris got killed in a friendly fire incident in Iraq, and crucially, the Ministry of Defence covered it up. There's loads about it on the internet. You can go type in "who killed Chris Madison" and you will get a documentary about it on BBC Two. I found out by seeing his face on the front page of a newspaper in Spa one morning, and sort of just did the whole Pepe hands, like dropped to my fucking knees and was inconsolable. That's how I got it. And anyway, I mean, to be fair, I had an idea because I used to look at the casualties on this thing called CFAX late at night on BBC Two. They used to have a rolling casualty list from the Iraq War, so you would see the names. And I saw a C. Madison, and I was like, what are the odds? And I went to get a paper just to check, and there he was. So anyway, the Ministry of Defence lied about it. They said he had been killed by an enemy insurgent that fired a rocket-propelled grenade at the boat he was on. Blew the side. It happened to be where he was sat. It blew the side of the hull apart and tore him up with shrapnel, and gave him, injuries that even if he had survived, they said his quality of life would have been awful. I think they've always tried to imply if he'd survived, he would have been, it was a brain injury. The Ministry of Defence swooped in, right, very quickly. They said, don't worry, we'll handle the funeral for you. Mrs. Madison will do all this stuff. We went, and I got frozen out. I mean, his mother didn't really like me because, again, I was a delinquent, right? And so I couldn't even be a coffin bearer at my best friend's funeral. It was all the people who served with him, many of whom were on the boat sporting injuries. One of those guys got up at the funeral with his injuries. He limped up, and he said, what happened that day when the grenade hit us? Chris didn't die at first. He was like, he got out of the boat and he got in the water. He pulled me out, and he went down fighting. And this is a complete fiction. This is a fabrication. That didn't happen. It couldn't have happened. The injuries that he sustained would not allow that to happen. So they told a fucking lie at the guy's funeral, which never sat right with me. They told a completely different version of events at the funeral, which, again, that's forever, And then, obviously, the Guardian journalists and the BBC journalists, they were able to take a piece of the wreckage and they did tests on it, because that's back when journalists used to give a shit. And the tests proved it wasn't a rocket-propelled grenade. It was a British missile that had blown up the boat. And what had happened was he'd just got off HMS Ocean and got to Basra. There was another friendly fire incident. A special forces unit couldn't discern the identity of a non-special forces unit upriver, and they were peppering each other with fucking bullets, right? Not knowing what was going on. This is how fucked up Iraq was. Like, no one knew what the fuck was going on. Everyone was so scared of the big bad boogeyman of the elite Republican Guard, the Iraqi elite Republican Guard. The reality was that for every soldier that had a gun, there was a soldier that had a gun with no bullets. Iraq was fucked. But we told all these lies, the WMD lies. So the military was on like fucking running around like dogs with the zoomies out there. So anyway, they were peppering each other with bullets, and then the team that was here radioed down, saying, "We need backup. We need backup." Chris had just arrived. He said, "I'll fucking go. Let's go. Let's go." He was about that shit. He was about that life. He'd served in Sierra Leone. He came home with PTSD from that. He saw a child soldier get fucking wiped out. Told me some fucking horror stories. But he was about that shit. You know, he was about the brotherhood, right? So he fucking said, "I'll go." So he gets on a boat, one of them little boats with the like on the back. It's completely not fitted for combat, there for reconnaissance. So he jumped on one of them with the rest of the boys, and they went up. And then, because there's a fire incident up here, the people that were monitoring that thought that was more insurgents. You know, this is so incompetent. And so they fired a missile on that boat. And that boat killed him outright. That missile, killed him outright. And then they lied about it to the family because they wanted to cover it all up, so they weren't going to be held accountable. And that's what happened to my best friend. So naturally, this left me with some thoughts about the military. This seemed to have had an impact on 21-year-old Richard Lewis of some sort. And after that, I thought back to how, when you were in Middlesbrough or these shit-tatty little towns, the big van with the guy in, with the impressive uniform would roll up. And they would say, "Hi, what's your name? You look like a good scrapping young lad. What are your grades?" "Well, education's important in the army. A lot of people think only morons join the military, but me, I had a PhD in neurochemistry, and you should totally join. I mean, what are you going to do? What does your dad do? Work down the mines? Did he works in a factory? Does he?" "Well, you don't want to do that, do you? You want to see the world. I mean, you just do it for 4 years, get your head straight, and they just lay on this fucking bullshit until you, a working class teenager with no prospects, relent, and you would think it's a good idea to go and die to fucking further some political agenda. You're not protecting anyone when you go and invade the Middle East. You're not fighting them over there to stop them coming here. They're never coming here. So anyway, I'm really pissed off with the fucking military and how it's advertised and how they and so having that experience, and then I went to a DreamHack, and at a DreamHack, the Swedish military was there, and they were bringing in kids as young as 8 or 9 to use the Xbox tank controller they use, and saying, "Wow, you're brilliant, you're so good, you could really join when you grow up." And it's like, they're children. And they don't have a concept of what war is. And they don't have a concept of what it's like to die or see your friends die. And you're at a gaming event and you're showing them an Xbox controller and keeping that association that it's some safe activity that you do. And I was so appalled at that. I wrote an article about it. It was called Bang Bangs for Real, because that was what my housemate's kid used to say. He used to watch his dad was a CS player, and he used to watch his dad play Counter-Strike and say, "You're so good at the game, Dad, you should go and do bang bangs for real." What he used to say, you should join the army, because again, he couldn't disassociate the two things. And after that, I was like, this is evil. The military recruitment complex is an evil industry. We might need a military, that's fine. You don't need to prey on children and teenagers to get your fucking fodder, to get your meat. It's gross. It should be banned. If a kid is told smoking is bad, they should be told getting fucking shot at by insurgents is bad. It's that simple. And that's a stance that I've always held because of all the experiences throughout my life, not least of all, losing a friend. So, what's that got to do with Boston? Well, what indeed? This was the event where we got sponsored by the US fucking Air Force, didn't we? Now, in the build-up to Boston, there were three things that emerged as problems. The first was the relationship between E-League and Thorin had irreparably broke down by this point. It's the best major of all time, and Thorin isn't there, and that's criminal for me. But there was nothing I could do. There was no card I could play. I tried. They wouldn't budge on it. They'd argued back and forth, pissed each other off, and I don't even know if they'd asked if Duncan would have worked it, but I probably think that he would have. The other thing that had happened was, in the absence of Duncan, I turned around and said, Yanko better be here. No more fucking around. No more Ivan Drago bullshit. No more putting subtitles up on Guardian's interviews. None of that. This is a global game. Fuck your American sensibilities. Let's get the best analysts available. You won't hire Thorin. You've got to hire Yanko. So we got Yanko out to an American event in Boston. And that was the other thing. And then the other thing that got brought up was it's sponsored by the US Air Force. And the US Air Force wanted to do, and did do, all of the MVPs. Right? Now, you cannot say to an American executive, particularly in the world of sports, fuck having the military anywhere near this. You can't do it. Americans fetishize the military. They just do. It's just part of their thing, right? And I said, I'm not going to do it. And I think I did do it in the end. I think you probably find footage of me on one or two occasions saying, and now the US Air Force MVP of that game. But I argued back and forth, and they just said, the military, they're putting a lot into this. And I'm just like, yeah, but this is bad. I don't support this. And actually, I was vehemently against the Iraq War. I think Bush was a war criminal, and I think the Air Force specifically were complicit in those war crimes because they dropped the bombs that killed the civilians. And I've written articles that say this. They're out there. You don't want to put me near this. So anyway, the compromise was Golden Boy, who would come in, was going to handle the US stuff. I don't know how he felt about it, but it weren't going to be me. But I think for the main broadcast, not the stadium stuff, they had me saying the fucking, and now it was brought to you by the US Air Force. It was like that. The other problem, the US Air Force carpet bombed Serbia, and Yanko is a Serbian. So, hey Yanko, want to work a major? Get you in the major fold, yeah? Yeah. Love to do a major. Love to come to America. Yeah. Well, just so you know, there is going to be a US Air Force logo on the desk while you, a Serbian man, is talking. Just saying. So look, I'm not going to get into Yugoslavia with you. I'm not, listen, no point in that. Everybody round here knows I stay out of all that shit. The Balkan shit, all of that shit. I'm not in. But I'ma just say, Serbians remember that. They remember American planes dropping bombs on their country. And it weren't that long ago. It was in my lifetime. It didn't happen in World War II. It happened in the fucking, 90s. So, it was a fucking tough one. And I raised my objections and I fought the fights. But in the end, you're just going to have military adjacent to sports in America. There's no winning that one. But I want it on the record since we're talking about everything, because I know a lot of people say they did it. Richard, you said you were against the US Air Force in the article, but when it was E-League and it was your bag, you had the sponsoring. You didn't see me in a fucking uniform prancing around, did you?
I let you off once before, but you still got the nerve to come back here and make trouble again.
What does it all mean?